Welcome everyone. As our attendees continue to roll in here, I just want to welcome you all back to the Dialogues in European Jain Studies speaker series here on April 8th, 2024. Here you see the Dialogues page where you registered for the event. And I also just want to point out to you that in addition to today, where we're going to hear about teaching and learning Jainism in contemporary society, that you can also see our future events by clicking here under the future events page, and you will see that we do have our final dialogue for this series coming up on May 13th, for which you can register. I will also drop that registration link in the chat box for you, so you can click on it there. That event will be the Future of Jain Studies, and it will feature my collaborators here on this project, Maria Lengorise, Tine Wekemans, and myself. And we will be talking about the future of Jain Studies, the future of European Jain Studies, and you can go in and read more about that there on the webpage that I will provide for you. So without further delay, actually, I always forget to mention this. There is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, I should mention. And so throughout the duration of this event, if you want to ask questions of the speakers, which we would encourage you to do to get the dialogue going, you may feel free to type them in that box. We will see them and we will address them. So once again, welcome everyone to the next event in the Dialogues in European Jain Studies speaker series. I will now turn it over to my collaborator at Ghent University, Tine Wekemans, who will introduce the topic. Thank you, Tine.
Thank you, Chris. So when I set out about writing a bit of an introduction to the topic, teaching and learning Jainism, the first thing that sprang to mind was an article, and it took me a while to realize who it was by. It's one of John Court's. How do Jains know what they know? This discusses a textual curriculum for Jain laity as advised by a Jain Muni. It's an insightful read. It's a 2004 article, and it is on many of these lovely websites where you can get Jain stuff for free. But I guess the most impactful part of it for me is the title, because how do Jains know what they know? I do a lot of interviews and I interact with a lot of people, and very often members of the Jain community tell me, oh, but I hardly know anything. But what do they mean by this? Because they seem quite knowledgeable to me. Knowledge can be theoretical, it can be practical, experiential or bookish, it can be intuitive, it can be based on stories, it can be built painstakingly through a lifetime of study or contemplation, or rather it can be purely academic. Not only what counts as essential knowledge is the question, but also how should knowledge be gained, how does one learn, and what does one teach? And this is central to today's dialogue. The workings of information and knowledge, two very different but necessarily interlinked concepts, are well worth our attention, especially in our contemporary world where the sources of information on Jainism and being Jain are many. Sadhus, sadhvis, pandits, gurus, texts and storybooks, academic literature, aunties, pachala teachers, and websites. So in the spirit of things, I asked the new Jain AI tool, Jain GPT, the question fielded by John Court. How do Jains know what they know? It told me that in Jainism, the right knowledge is that which helps to understand reality, controls the mind and purifies the soul. It's through the right knowledge that the ties of attachment are severed, interests in the ultimate goal is developed, and the feelings of universal friendship are strengthened. I did not feel that that actually answered my question. However, the tool did at least get the central importance of seeking knowledge. Working on Jainism outside of India myself, it continues to amaze me how many ways people have of looking for information and intricate systems of prioritizing different sources depending on the questions they have. Such intricate practices of information seeking and knowledge building are, of course, dependent on personal preference and individual inclination, but they're also clearly embedded in a local community and in the intellectual culture of the circles people move in. And in this way, different and constantly developing and adapting communities of learning and teaching emerge. Although some research on this process for Jainism has been done, we will hear today the Samani ji and Professor Bindi Shah, who have worked on that. I'm also thinking of Shivani Botra's work and some of my own even. We have John Courts, who started this entire question. So, but I feel that there's quite a lot to continue to unpack there, because this is such a central thing to look at within any tradition, but especially within one such as Jainism. So we're very pleased to have an excellent lineup of speakers for you today. We're very pleased to have a lot of lovely people in the audience as well. I'll now hand over to the lovely Marie-Hélène Goris of Birmingham University, who will introduce our MC for tonight. Take it away.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much, Tina, for such a wonderful introduction to the topic. It is also a special pleasure for myself to introduce Mehool Sanghrajka, who will act as the presider of this session. But no, how to introduce Mehool? This is actually a real question, because if you know him, you know that his ability to spearhead major collaborative projects is such that you might get dizzy by the mere list of them. So I would like to start by saying that Mehool is a managing trustee of the Institute of Jainology, an organization based in London that provides a platform for interaction between Jain communities, but also promotes public awareness of Jainism, or facilitates scholarly research, notably by cataloging and digitalizing manuscripts and artifacts. Next to this, Mehool is also a driving force in the development of so next to the Institute of Jainology, the One Jain, an overarching association that represents 29 Jain organizations in the UK from different sectarian affiliation, the Jain All-Party Parliamentary Group, so a grouping of parliamentarians from both houses of parliament and all parties who are interested in the Jain faith and community. The Jain Students Association in the UK, also Jainpedia, that probably many of us use a lot, and that notably includes many fantastic pictures of Jain manuscripts and artifacts that are out of copyright. So, and this last part is notably thanks also to Mehool's constant collaboration with institutions such as the British Library, the Wellcome Collection, or the V&A. Next to all this, Mehool also regularly represents the Jain community in interfaith events, including a yearly delegation at the Vatican, and writes on or invite articles for the publications at the Vatican. He's also in dialogue with governmental institutions. For example, he worked with the Office of National Statistics to ensure that schools, hospitals, and other public institutions in the UK are informed about the Jain way of living, the diet, the end-of-life care, and other similar important aspects of the life of a Jain. And in light of all this, it's not surprising that he was awarded an MBA title for his service to the community. So let me just add that Mehool holds a PhD on Jaina philosophy from the International Open University, and that he has recently published a paper titled Reflection on Consciousness in Jaina Soteriological Thought, in the volume Consciousness in Science and Jain Philosophy, edited by Samani Chaitanya, Pragya, and Pratap Sanchiti at FYU. So now I will focus a few more seconds on the theme of today's session. Mehool is the founder and CEO of Learning Possibilities, a social enterprise that provides technology to improve access to learning all over the world. And he is also an important teaching figure within the Jain community in the UK. Just a few examples: he leads a weekly discussion group on the principles of Jaina philosophy, or he organized the Rimpayushan, some Pratikram session that included also English translations and explanation of mindfulness in Jainism. So I hope I have not forgotten anything too important, but already you can see why I am thrilled that he is the one leading this session on teaching and learning Jainism in contemporary society. So thank you for joining us today, Mehool, and I'll now let you share a few of your own thoughts on the topic and introduce our speakers. Thank you very much. Oh, you're muted. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction, Marie-Hélène. Jai Jinendra, everybody. Welcome to this series in the dialogue program. Can I also add my thanks to the Arihanta Academy, the University of Ghent and the University of Birmingham for this wonderful collaboration. If you haven't seen any of the previous webinars. They're on the website, as Chris said. And I'm delighted that we're here for this one. So wherever you are, welcome. And today we'll be talking about teaching and learning Jainism in contemporary society. I wanted to start with a reflection that my earliest childhood memory of learning Jainism was attending Pathshala, or what you might call Sunday school. And it's interesting that when you look back, what Pathshala was a means of learning rituals, Samaik, or the equanimity ritual, Pratikaman, or the forgiveness ritual. And that was essentially the curriculum of Pathshala. There was no question of learning scriptures or any of the agamas, because these were reserved almost exclusively for those who are ordained as ascetics, monks or nuns, because it was believed that you had to be enlightened to read them. And so, our focus as lay people lay in these rituals, and whatever else we learned came from monks and nuns. And so Jainism is a very young academic topic, probably a couple of 100 years. And I believe largely because of the European Indologists who translated the manuscripts and made them accessible and available. And today, if you look at the context in which this is being presented, we have community schools and classes widely available. There are at least half a dozen in London alone every week. And with the audience, with the panelists here, you can see that teaching Jainism at university is also now becoming commonplace. So it's a great topic in the sense of the change that it's brought about. And so let me start by introducing the first speaker today. The format will be that they will speak for about 20 minutes. And then once we've had both speakers, we'll have a Q&A. So this is your opportunity to put questions, as Chris said, into the Q&A box. We'll be very happy to either send them to the panelists or reply back on the Q&A box itself. So I'm really, really happy that our first speaker is Pujya Samniji Pratibha Pragya ji, who many of you know or may know from her long stay in London. Samniji is a nun in the Jain Therapanth order and a senior disciple of the Jain Acharya Sri Mahashramanji, who as I said, many of you will know, and is the head of the Therapanth order. She has, quite uniquely for a Jain nun, completed a PhD at SOAS, University of London, and is also a visiting research fellow there, as well as teaching now at the Florida International University in the United States. So while she was here in London, she established the JVB, the Jain Vishwa Bharati World Peace Center, and there is now a thriving community around that center in London. Her topic today is going to be yogic practices in the Nirvan Kalyanak of Bhagwan Mahavir. Welcome to the webinar, Samniji, and over to you.
Thank you, Mehool, for your kind introduction. And thank you to the organizers. Today, I would like to explain and set my argument that Nirvana Kalyanak, which is very important phase of the 5 Kalyanaks, and this year, specifically in 2024, Jains worldwide celebrating the 5th auspicious event and marking 2005 550th Nirvan Kalyanak of Bhagwan Mahavir. It is a paramount and historical event in worldwide Jain congregation. The main importance of Nirvan Kalyanak, I would like to see through the yogic practices, how yogic practices are involved. And through that lens, I would like to argue that these are 5 or 4 disciplines which are very important for the Jina's life. Tapo Yoga, unification of fasting, then postural yoga, asana yoga, or popularly known as Sthan Yoga in Jainism. And the third one is Jnana Yoga, how the knowledge is delivered and how one knows the soul is nowhere. The capacity of soul is nowhere. And the fourth one is the meditative tool, that is Paramashukla Dhyan. So all these 4 aspects were we delivered through this paper. Examining these four specific aspects of Nirvan Kalyana, I would like to set in the context how and why Jainism has its connection with the politics. At that time, the time of Bhagwan Mahavir's Nirvana, 18 kings from the Kosal and Kasi region were present, and that is making a tie with political influence of Jainism. And I would like to take the term nirvana. Nirvana is a state of complete extinction of the flame of karma. Or nirvana is defined in the later literature of Niryukti and commentarial literature, the establishing the self in its own nature. Nirvana is defined and provided more than 18 synonyms in Hemchandra Acharya's Nammala, where we can see the state of nirvana is explained, and Professor Nalini Balbir commented on Abhidhana Chintamani Nammala that it is a Jainized version of the nirvana. So you can see the term nirvana is popularly known within the Hinduism, in the Buddhism, and also Jainism. So nirvana, we get the 18 synonyms, and the finally, I'm not going in the detail, but it is a specific state of the soul and how to the soul reach towards the nirvana. So for the 4 unification of the tapa, asana, and knowledge and itself, the Param Shukla Dhyan. So first of all, I would like to talk about the Tapo Yoga. If we see Bhagwan Mahavir's life, and Avashyak Niryukti presents a specific documentation of the Tapasya of Bhagwan Mahavir, which is very important. We can understand during his 12.5 years, he was eating only 350 days. You see, only in 12 years. And the list of his fasting is available. The Niryuktikar, we can understand that how much on the fasting, but the argumentation of the fasting is by Acharya Mahapragya, that Mahavira was in fasting, but not only fasting. He made a term of the Ayurveda, which is popularly known as Langan. Mahavira's fasting is not Langan. It is for meditation, and specifically he used to engage himself 10 days, 15 days in various pratimas, and these pratimas are a full-fledged package of fasting, postural yoga, meditation, and also meditation with padastha rupastha rupatit. So it is dharmadhyan. During his chadmasta avastha, he was engaged in dharmadhyan as well as shukladhyan. So list goes a long list, and finally here we can see that Bhagavan Mahavir, he was a charma sariri, means in his ultimate embodiment. So what was the need? Why he observed fasting at the last phase? So here we can see the answer is available through the Acharang Niryukti, and which is like Bhagavan Mahavir was quite powerful, and he knows it is his last birth, but through this, he has given a lesson to the generation that one can follow it, because Tirthankar is a role model for the whole congregation. If we see, is it a need? No, there is no need to fast, but it is a live lesson through the Bhagwan's life that one can engage in fasting, and generations to come can engage in fasting. So Tapo Yoga was prominent, and at the Nirvana time, Bhagavan has 2 days fasting, which is known as Bela or Chattam Bhatta Pachakhanam, and observed without water. And interestingly, all the fasting of Bhagavan Mahavir throughout his Chadmastakal was without water. Now, moving on the second point of my argument, that Asana Yoga was very prominent during Bhagavan Mahavir's Nirvana Kalyanak. According to Kalpa Sutra, he was in Paryanka Asana, and 12th century polyglot Hemchandracharya also noted that he was in Paryanka Asana, and Paryanka Asana consists of the lower part of the thighs being placed on the feet and hands being placed nearby the navel and positioning upward. Here, there is argument that some acharya, like Thanang Tikakar, Abhay Dev Suri, he noted that Paryankasan and Padmasan both are the same pose. But according to Hemchandracharya, there is difference, and he included Paryanka Asana and Padmasan in his Yoga Sastra. More interestingly, the Swapagya Vritti, auto commentary of Yoga Sastra, presents that this asana is also available in Patanjal Bhashya Vivarnam or Tattva Vaisaradi, which is edited by Jambu Vijayji. Acharya Muni Jambu Vijay also explained that these two poses are not the same. What is available in Patanjal Bhashya Vivarnam is different from the pose which is documented by Hemchandracharya. Now, third point is Jnana Yoga. Bhagavan Mahavir was in the Samavasaran. So again, the supernatural power was totally involved. The Samavasaran was erected, and interestingly, the first Samavasaran was only in the divine beings. And at that time, in that samavasaran, there was no human being. So Bhagavan Mahavir's teaching was not materialized. So it is known as an Ashcharya, a specific event documented in Kalpa Sutra. That second Samavasaran was in Apapa, which is the modern province of Pavapuri. So at that time and the last Samavasaran, on the time of Nirvana, that was also erected at Pavapuri. So the second and the last Samavasaran was erected in the Pavapuri. So here we can see Mahavira is delivering his speech, and that speech is known as Uttaradhyan Sutra, but there is some other arguments, popularly the argument of Acharya Mahapragya, that this whole Uttaradhyan Sutra is not the last pravachan of Mahavir, but it is later on compiled by the Stavira, and finally it was finally given the shape by Acharya Devardhigani in the council, the last council of the Agamas. So Bhagavan Mahavir's last pravachan, last sermon lasted for 48 hours, which is really a question of understanding that how such a long period is possible to deliver the Deshana, but it is documented, and it is a popular question that even those two last day, being a omniscient, he knows everything, he can Janai Pasai, he knows, he understands. So at that time, 18 kings were in the Poshad, a specific, the 11th vow, and also thousands of monks, nuns, Keval Gyani, Manah Paryavyani, Avadhi Gyani, and lay followers were there, including the subhuman animals and other creatures. So this congregational stage present a specific moment of the Jnana Yoga, and which is collected in Uttaradhyan Sutra. Now, finally, the stage which is Dhyana Yoga. So, according to Jain canonical meditative form, the two meditative states which are not conducive to the liberation, and specifically the 12th century Hemchandracharya excluded from the list of dhyana, Artha and Rudra Dhyan, Dharma and Shukla Dhyan. So Dharma Dhyan and Shukla Dhyan, which is popularly Dharma Dhyan, is in the state of Samyak Darshan from the fourth Gunasthana in the spiritual development ladder. And the Shukla Dhyan is available from 11th to 12th Gunasthana, and Param Shukla, the last two stages. So the first two, Prathakatva Vitarka and Ekatva Vitarka, these two are available at the Vitarag states of the 11th and 12th Gunasthana. But the Param Shukla, which is very, very important, and apratipati means once it comes, it never go, it never annihilate, or it is forever. So Param Shukla Dhyan at the 13th and 14th Gunasthana. So omniscience accompanied by mental, verbal, and physical activity. So when the Tirthankar deliver his lecture, there is Sutra Agam, means the main Sutra aphorism. Then Artha Agam means explanation of the sutra. So at that state, the Sayogi Kevali, the Bhagavan Mahavir, moving from sutra to earth and earth to sutra. Ragam and Earth Agam both are the part of his sermon. And finally, the state of Ayogi Kevalim, which is very important and which is documented in Uttaradan Sutra, in Dasrakalik Sutra, a state of Saileshi. Saileshi means like a mountain, like means mountains are not moved. Similarly, a symbolic meaning at that state, the omniscient Lord Mahavir is without any activity, a yogi kevalim. So this time span is very short, like a, e, u, ri, ri. Only these 5 vowels one can recite. This is the span of this last stage of Shukla Dhyana. And the same state is discussed by Professor Bronkhorst, that Mahabharat and Gita also explain the state, which is also very, very close to the Salesi state, means very close to the motionlessness of the 4th Gunasthana. So now we are heading towards the process of nirvana, and the nirvana is like in one time unit is very subtlest unit of the time, and within that unit the Tirthankar gate nirvana, and Tirthankar reached on the atop of universe within one time unit. Why it happened? So it is explained that Tirthankar do not have Vakragati. Vakragati means it is not moving through different dimensions. It is only one dimension, and due to the one dimension, it is a moving state. And during this moving state, Tirthankar reached on the atop of the universe. And that is a state which is the philosophical basis of the soul, the state of soul, or the concept of soul in Jainism. Normally, at the worldly state, soul has many layers, and it is enveloped with subtle bodies and gross bodies. But at the state of nirvana, no body at all. So metaphysical dualism is the state of worldly existence. Here you can see the central point is the state, then karmic layer, then subtle consciousness, which is known as Adyavasai, then fiery body, the psychic colors, Lesha, and the physical Audaric body, and the physical activity of the body, then mental activity, and the physical, mental, and verbal activities. So all these activities are stand still, and Bhagavan attain nirvana. So the state of nirvana, again, a big question, how we can understand the state of nirvana while there is no body, nothing is there. So this aspect is very important to understand, and this is explained very well in the first Agam, Acharang Sutra. So after this, the soul is reached on the atop of the universe. All sound recoils then. There is no room for logic or speculation, nor does the mind penetrate there. The liberated souls in solitary or supportless in the pure state of knowledge. It is neither long nor small, nor round, nor rectangular, and no the circle, neither black nor blue, nor red, nor yellow, nor white. It is neither good or bad smell. It is not bitter, pungent, or no twist, no sweet. It is neither rough nor soft, nor heavy, light, cold, or hot. It is neither dry, it neither possesses any physique, without rebirth, without attachment, aversion, neither male, female, or neuter. It knows and perceives. It is beyond any analogy. It is neither color, smell, taste, touch. It is Arupi Satta beyond that. So it is difficult to explain the state of liberation through our own physical lens or through this any analogy. So that state is the state of liberation. And when Lord got liberation at that time, there, there is no mention of the bodily ritual in the main sutras. Even it is not available in Kalpa Sutra, but it is available in commentary literature and later on narrative literature. So during Mahavira's Nirvana, all 18 rulers were there from Kasi and Kosal, and they making it a festive light, and they used earthen lamp for this. But again, a question arises: if the all 18 kings and the people who are listening his sermon are in Poshad, Ahoratam, so how these earthen lamps were used, or might they instructed, being a king, they instructed, but it is marked as Deepavali, a line of a row of the light. So it is a kind of expression of devotional component in Jainism, and also the supernatural power is involved in this auspicious or beneficiary event, the fifth Kalyanak. Indra and other gods, they descended from their heavens, and the Indra instructed for the Nirvana Kalyanak, and they bathed the body of the Mahavira with the holy water of the Kshirosagar. They used and applied the sandal paste, adorned him with silk garment, a crown. So all these ornamental adoration, and accompanied by the millions of people, Mahavira borne on the palanquin, palki, amidst on the solemn music and resonance of instrument, and devotee paid respect. So this all supernatural power and their involvement in the Nirvana Kalyanak is making a gorgeous event, but definitely it is later development. And finally, they put on the this palanquin on the pyre. So it is again the funeral rite of like final rite of Bhagavan Mahavir's body. And again, a new departure when they put the fire and pour the clarified butter, and ceremoniously, finally, when the funeral over, they sprinkle the Kshirosagar water on the pyre, and perfumed water to quench the flames, and upon the conclusion of these sacred rites, the god ascended to heaven with them the bone relics of Mahavira. Here I would like to compare with the Parinirvana Sutta of the Buddhism. Buddhist funeral is available in their main sutra, and a sutra is dedicated for that specific event as Parinirvana Sutta. And Buddhist relics are very popularly known, and there are so many uh, erected stupas worldwide. Where is Buddha's teeth? Where is Buddha's all these things? But today we cannot have anything as a relic of Bhagavan Mahavir's bones and all these things. Though at Pavapuri we have Bhagavan Mahavir's lotus temple, and that lotus temple there only the footprint of Mahavira are dedicated, but the bone relics are in heaven, in possession of the divine being. So it is really interesting to understand. And the celebration of Diwali, which is popularly Jains follow on the Nirvana. And in the conclusion, I would like to say that this event synthesizes 4 types yogic practices, and finally leading towards the ayoga, the stillness, and metaphysically, this state is different from the Vedanta in Burman, because the existence of soul in the worldly existence, also at the stage of liberated, which is individual state forever, which is not merged in the Brahman. And this nirvana is different from the Buddhist nirvana, because after Buddhist nirvana, they don't describe any much more description as acharanga. And today's lecture, I would like to connect with the modern worldview. It is notable departure that even today, the Jain congregation celebrate with the name chanting of Bhagavan Mahavira, meditating on Bhagavan Mahavira, and popularly the second Anga, Sutra Kirtangs, the 6th chapter, which is composed by Sudharman Swami, and Sudharma, the first Acharya in the lineage of Bhagavan Mahavir's congregation. He is known as the composer of Virathui. Virathui is a popular eulogy and composition in a highest poetic caliber, and offering to Bhagavan Mahavir, and it is explained as if Sudharma, the Gandhar and the first Acharya, has seen him and depicting him with various symbolic things and various similes. So very high caliber composition. So many sects, specifically Sthanakvasi and Terapanthi sects, they dedicate these 3 days to recital of the Virathui. In the Digambar tradition, offering of the huge laddu in the Jain temple, and in iconic Jain tradition of the Svetambra, it also presented with the ghee boli and auction of the various states of Mahavira's Nirvana Kalyanak, specifically these traditional aspect of popularly observed throughout the Jain congregation. And the ritual systems are offered, which are giving this event a historical base. And within the contemporary Jain practice, it is also observed with fasting. And here I have so many questions on the path of moksha marg. It creates some tension between worldly and non-worldly values, which is popularly raised by Professor John Court as well. And the nirvana is a state of purely setting into the nature, setting into the existence, but it has its importance through the yogic practices, because today worldwide the yoga is booming, meditative practices are booming, postural yoga is booming, and therefore Jains can have, Jains and non-Jains, everybody can have that. In the modern worldview, this Nirvana Kalyanak is very important, and we can have this historical moods in a whole picture, in theorization of the total orientation of this event, this beneficiary event. And finally, I pay homage on the specific yearly observance of Bhagavan Mahavir's 2550th Nirvana Kalyanak. And I would like to thank organizers. Thank you.
Thank you, Samani-ji, for that enlightening talk. There were two things that really did strike me about Samani-ji's talk. And the first is that, you know, how far have we moved? We've gone from story literature for the lay people to now teaching Jainism today in a way that we approach this theme from, you know, so many interconnected aspects, whether it's, you know, yogic practice or philosophy or even politics. And secondly, you know, as somebody who is a practitioner and somebody, you know, on that enlightened path of asceticism, I think Samani-ji brings a unique point of view, which is both academic and experiential, which none of us can bring. We're theoretical as much as academic, but here is somebody who experiences the philosophy that he teaches. So thank you so much for that, Samani-ji. And our next speaker is Professor Bindi Shah. Welcome, Bindi. She's the assistant professor at the Department of Sociology at the University of Southamptom, and researches on migration, religion, nationhood, citizenship for British Asians, but also for the Jain diaspora. And she's going to be talking a little bit about enacting the transmission of Jain Dharma and formal practices in the field of the diasporic Jain cultural production. So welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Mehool. Let me share my screen. Okay, that should be sharing. Let me turn it into... Okay, there we go. Just wanted to start with thanking Marie-Hélène, Tina, and Chris for inviting me to be part of this Dialogues in European Jain Studies webinar series. It's definitely been a very enlightening first presentation. So in my presentation, very different. My angle is going to address the transmission of Jain Dharma to the upcoming generations in the diaspora. And as there we go. And as Mehool introduced, I'm a sociologist. Specifically, my research is on migrant communities. And I've been studying the Jain diaspora, particularly in the UK and the USA, for some years now. And my focus has particularly been on young adult Jains between the ages of 18 and 30 who self-identified as practicing Jains. So in this presentation, what I want to do is draw on in-depth qualitative research that generated original data through the methods that are listed on the slide there. But I also will draw on other research and anecdotal observations that I've made on the UK Jain community since 2010. Okay, there we go. So the other thing that I wanted to have a quick word on is the conceptual tools that I'm using in this presentation as a sociologist. Now, those of you who are social scientists will have heard of the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, and I want to use Bourdieu's concept of the field of cultural production. But I appreciate that there are non-academics and non-social scientists in the audience, and just to briefly explain these terms then, let me break down both cultural production and the field. So Bourdieu says that cultural production refers to the social processes and mechanisms involved in the generation and circulation of cultural forms, values, norms, and practices. And the field for Bourdieu refers to the arenas of production, circulation, and appropriation of goods, services, knowledge, or status, and the competitive positions held by actors in their struggle to accumulate and monopolize these different kinds of capitals. So for Bourdieu, then, a field is a space of social activity in which there are creators who intentionally create a certain kind of cultural product. But it is a competitive space in which cultural products gain status or widespread recognition or adoption depends on the capitals that are held by actors in that field. And Bourdieu distinguishes between 4 different types of capitals that are possessed by actors. The first is economic capital, which is familiar to us and refers to money and wealth. The second is cultural capital, which is a little bit more complex, but for our purposes, we can think of it as symbols, ideas, tastes, and preferences that can be used strategically as resources in cultural production. And social capital refers to both formal and informal networks and relationships that actors are part of. And finally, symbolic capital refers to the various forms of distinction and prestige that are acquired through cultural recognition. So I argue that we can use Bourdieu's concepts to study a wide range of cultural phenomena. And drawing on Bourdieu's ideas then, in this presentation, I define Jain communities in the diaspora as a field or a Jain diaspora social space. And I tease out actors in this field of Jain diaspora social space who are involved in cultural production. I'm particularly interested in understanding which actors are involved in the transmission of Jain Dharma, in deciding what elements of the Dharma are worth reproducing, and finally, who leads this production. So on to some of my data, and starting with transmission to young Jain children in their childhood. For almost all of my participants, parents, grandparents, and sometimes extended family members are important sources of transmission of Jain rituals, prayers, diet, and socialization into Jain traditions and beliefs during early childhood. And I've included some quotes here. I'm not going to read through them, but just to say that Ambika in the US refers to her nanny who taught her the Navkar mantra and different stutis and prayers. Amir in the US said referred to his parents teaching him stutis, but also socializing him into the religious festival of Paryushan. And in the UK, Aarti mentions her parents who taught her elements of karma theory, but also she remembers visiting aunts who had taken Diksha in India, and that was part of her socialization into the Jain tradition as well. Dia was slightly different in that she said that her parents were not interested in the technical aspects of Jain Dharma, but it is more about how you show it to others in terms of compassion. So the values and principles were what she learned from her parents. And finally, Kaushik, I had to put that quote in because Kaushik said he really enjoyed sitting with his dadi who taught him how to do Samani, that he loved it. It wasn't a chore in any way. So the role of family members in the informal transmission of Jain Dharma is not surprising for those of us who have grown up in Jain families. And as Donaldson found in her survey of Pathshala teachers and students in the USA. In Bourdieu's terms, then, we can think of these family members using their cultural capital to ensure the cultural production of Jain Dharma amongst their children. However, since the late 1990s, many school-aged diasporic Jain children have had access to Jain Pathshalas. In the US, the Jaina Education Committee has been at the forefront of developing a systematic Pathshala curriculum. And here I specifically want to draw on Shivani Botra's excellent research on Pathshalas in the USA. Botra argues that the goal of Pathshala education is to provide Jain sanskar, or a values education. But it also teaches key Jain prayers and encourages faith in the Tirthankars and developing an attachment for monks and nuns and being devoted to the Jain tradition. Lay Jains, both men and women, are involved in curriculum planning and delivery. So she notes that there is a shift away from monastic authority. Rather, the curriculum emphasizes ethical practices, the application of logic and scientific reasoning over doctrinal knowledge through memorization. Overall, Botra finds that the earlier Jain value of renunciation that Samani talked about has been reinterpreted. The focus now is on the application of Jain principles and engaging with the world through striving for success, healthy living, exercising compassion for animals, and supporting the environment. And though Jaina's goal is to promote a non-sectarian Jain identity, Botra finds that the Shwetamba perspectives dominate the pan-Jain identity being developed through the Pathshalas in the USA. However, though Jaina has extensive symbolic capital, having been around for more than 4 decades now, Botra notes that not all Pathshalas in the US draw solely on the curriculum developed by the Jaina Education Committee. Some combine the Jaina material with the Divine Touch curriculum developed by the Srimad Rajchandra Mission Dharapur, a Shwetamba-based Jain spiritual organization in India. The spiritual leader of this organization is Pujya Gurudev Rakesh Bhai Zaveri. And his devotees have also begun to establish home-based Pathshalas using the Divine Touch curriculum, which is divided into Arhat Touch, Magic Touch, and Spiritual Touch for different age groups going up right to the age of 16. And she notes that notes that others draw on curriculum developed by Virayatan, led by Acharya Sri Channaji, or Sri Namramuni's curriculum to run home-based Pathshalas. These are all Shwetamba-based curricula, and while these home-based Pathshalas are newly emerging in the last 10 years or so, Botra argues they challenge the dominance of the Jaina curriculum and goal of developing a non-sectarian pan-Jain identity. Moving to the UK, in the UK context, there has not been any systematic research on the development of Pathshalas. So an opening for research if anybody wants to do research here. However, my anecdotal evidence indicates there are many organizations involved in the development of a Pathshala curriculum for children here in the UK. The first Jain Pathshalas were established by Virayatan under the guidance of Acharya Sri Channaji in the late 1990s, mainly in London. And these Pathshalas focus on what I call the social organization of Jain Dharma, but they also taught key aspects of Jain philosophy and also rituals. Particularly interesting in terms of Virayatan and particularly the SCVP school is that over the past 10 years, it has been at the forefront of developing an English version of Pratikrama and delivering this throughout the 8 days of Paryushan using PowerPoint slides. And Virayathan's key philosophy is of compassion in action. So Virayathan also provides opportunities for students at its SCVP schools to spend a few weeks volunteering at Virayathan centers in India. A second organization in the UK context is the Srimad Rajchandra Mission Dharampur. Around 2010, they began to introduce the Divine Touch curriculum in the UK. So earlier, I think, than in the US. And initially, these were home-based pathshalas, but the mission opened up a spiritual center just outside London a few years ago, and weekly spiritual classes now take place there for North London-based children. These initiatives are from the Shwetambar tradition. From the Digambar tradition, and specifically inspired by the teachings of Pujya Gurudev Kanji Swami, the Sri Digambar Jain Association in Harrow runs weekly pathshalas for children and youth. So what I would say is that in the UK, the formal transmission of Jain Dharma to children and youth is fragmented. And that which exists is delivered by lay Jains, but draws on the teachings of specific religious and spiritual leaders in India who have symbolic capital. Another development from the 1990s onwards refers to another set of actors involved in the transmission of representation and production of Jain Dharma have been Young Jains UK and the Young Jains of America. Young Jains of UK was founded in 1987 by Atul Shah, whom many of you know, and is part of this dialogue series, I understand. Atul was inspired by a visiting Indian scholar, and he brought together other young Jain students from East Africa to provide a forum where young Jains could learn and debate aspects of the Jain tradition and the Gujarati Jain culture, as well as cultivate the sense of community they'd experienced in East Africa. What is distinctive about YJ UK is that it is a space where the transmission of Jain Dharma is characterized by the promotion of peer-led teaching rather than monastic authority. Also in the UK, around 2008, we see the emergence of Srimad Rajchandra Mission Dharampur youth groups under the leadership of Pujya Gurudev Rakesh Bhai Zaberi. In the USA, the establishment of Young Jains of America was inspired by YJ UK. So Saurabh Dalal, pictured here, a longtime veteran of YJA and Jaina, recounted that when people heard about YJ UK's activities and experiences from Atul Shah at the 1989 Jaina Convention, they responded positively. YJA was formally launched at a youth convention in 1993 as one of the 30 committees of Jaina, but run by young Jains. Operating within the Jaina structure, YJA activities are influenced by the parent organization. Seema Jain, also a veteran of YJA and Jaina, emphasized that the primary goal of establishing YJA in the USA was to provide a vehicle to transmit Jain Dharma to young Jains, but also to facilitate the building of identity and community. In other words, to ensure the social reproduction of the Jain community in the USA. What I also want to do in the few more minutes that I have left is to highlight the expression of Jain Dharma that each of these youth organizations transmitted to young Jains. Looking first at YJ UK, Atul Shah characterized YJ UK in its early years as, and I quote, not a heavily spiritual movement, but one that focused on the socialization of young Jains into Jain culture and community. So YJ UK activities in the 1990s reflected this early goal, as can be seen in the boxes on the slide there on the top half. One interesting activity was what Atul described as experiments with truth. This was inspired by Gandhi's experiences and experiments narrated in his autobiographical book, The Story of My Experiments with Truth. Atul organized 20 YJ UK members to apply this method for a week to test the relevance of principles such as ahimsa and aparigraha to life in 20th century London. Atul Shah continued to have a strong influence on YJ UK throughout the 1990s. And during this time, he also attended every Jain convention in the USA and participated in several academic conferences there. So Atul brought particular social and cultural capitals to YJ UK based on a transnational circulation of ideas. And Atul was influenced by Jain perspectives prevalent in the US, particularly those promoted by Chitrabhanu, a former monk who left his order and had been resident in the US since the 1970s and was the spiritual leader of Jaina. These Jain discourses were transmitted back to Britain by Atul and are evident in the titles and foci of the biennial YJ UK conventions held throughout the 1990s, as you can see on the box on the right there. Additionally, YJ UK invited individuals and organizations with whom it had an ethical and spiritual affinity, such as the Brahmakumaris, the Young Indian Vegetarian Network, British poet Benjamin Zephaniah, and the US-based Michael Tobias. However, in the early part of the 21st century, YJ UK's focus shifted under the influence of another key actor, this time a person called Shah, also of East African family heritage, but having grown up in the UK. Ashik described himself as a spiritual seeker and follower of Srimad Rajchandra's teachings. So Ashik brought a different set of cultural and social capitals to YJ UK, and this would lead to a shift in the boundaries of the Jain discourses transmitted by YJ UK. Conventions and smaller events organized by YJ UK throughout the 21st century demonstrate that the emphasis shifted to purifying the soul as a key focus of Jain practice, rather than simply living ethically. And in the orange box there is an excerpt from my field notes on the 2009 YJ UK convention that captures this shift. I'm not going to read all of that, but just to say also that in the past few years, my anecdotal observations indicate that particularly in the post-COVID era, YJ UK has struggled to maintain membership and attendance and has relied on social activities such as organizing garbas and picnics to maintain membership. What I think this reflects is an indication of a further fragmenting of the Jain social field in the UK. Turning now to Jain discourses transmitted by YJA in the USA, my research suggests that these discourses have focused on Jain ethics and their application in daily living. So Seema Jain recalled that daytime content in these conventions included lectures by religious scholars, as well as discussions on topics such as careers in Jainism, incorporating a Jain way of life in corporate and professional occupations such as engineering, IT, medicine, and pharmaceuticals, or vegetarianism, all of which was to provide resources for young Jains on how to, and I quote, handle it in the day-to-day life. And there was also always a social element at the conventions and in the smaller regional activities such as picnics and skiing trips and so on. Additionally, an emphasis on diet as a way to practice Jain Dharma has been an important element in all YJA conventions. At the 2008 convention, the convention pack included quite a vivid and dramatic booklet from PETA 2 on the commercial meat and dairy industries. And there were several sessions on the power of vegetarianism, veganism in a nutshell, and those that address diet and animal rights and linking it to ahimsa. In emphasizing Jain ethics, we see the influence of the Jaina Pachala curriculum that Potra noted. However, both Seema Jain and Saurabh Dalal highlighted two shifts in the expression of the Jain discourse at YJA conventions in the first decade of the 21st century. But despite the shifts, the conventions still remain within the frame of Jain ethics and their application in daily living. So the first shift was on ecology and going green. And I observed this shift at the 2008 convention, at the 2010 YJA convention, and in the overarching theme of the 2009 Jaina convention. The second shift, identified by Seema Jain and Saurabh Dalal, involved making links to concerns in the wider society and to non-Jains who convey similar ethical and moral values. And this kind of links to the links between Jainism and politics. So one of the keynote addresses at the 2008 YJA convention was delivered by Will Tuttle, author of The World Peace Diet and a longtime practicing vegan and animal rights activist. I just wanted to come back to the UK and youth organizations in the UK. I've already mentioned the emergence of the Srimad Bhagavatam Mission Dharampur youth groups in the UK. My recent interviews with young Jains in the USA also indicate the establishment of these youth groups in the US. And another new vehicle to transmit Jain Dharma and build community is the two-day youth festival organized by the Mission's London Centre last year. This is part of the annual Global Youth Festival that is held at the Mission Centre in Dharampur, India. And as the program of activities indicates on the slide, the focus was not just on the transmission of Jain Dharma, but also on personal development and building a community around the goals and values of Srimad Bhagavatam Mission Dharampur. Okay, to then end with some concluding remarks then. Like other migrant communities, Jains in the diaspora have developed practices, processes, and organizations to preserve their original culture, religious heritage, identity, and community. There's been an active and intentional informal and formal efforts to transmit Jain Dharma in the diaspora. Bourdieu's concept of field of cultural production highlights that the processes of cultural production not only include the creation of cultural production, but also reflection on how to produce it. And this concept also reveals that Jain diaspora social space is dynamic and competitive. All actors involved in the transmission of Jain Dharma have cultural and social capitals, but different actors gain symbolic capital over time or challenge symbolic capital of established actors. And finally, my research highlights that the boundaries of cultural fields are not predetermined by nation states. The boundaries of the Jain diaspora social space is not predetermined by nation states, but includes the transnational circulation of actors, ideas, and materials that link Jains in India, Britain, and the USA. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Bindi, for that fascinating and well-researched talk. Having grown up in the UK over these years, I could see a lot of what you said, and I think it's very interesting how you found the meaning behind what we probably take for granted. Before we move on to questions, and there is a Q&A box, please do use it. I just wanted to ask each of the presenters a question. So one of the things, Bindi, that you talked about was practices like teaching Pratikaman in English. And Samani, I just wanted to ask you that how important do you think language is in the ability to learn and teach Jainism? Do you think it is something that is vital for understanding Jain principles, or now with everything translated, can you communicate them effectively in English, for example?
Oh, you are muted.
Yeah, thank you for important question. If you want to connect with the reservoir of the 5,000 years or 3,000 years, then definitely the language is the bridge. You can connect, you can tap the reality. Otherwise, translation is like distilled water, and which is also important. I cannot say that this is not way, but the real essence of Jainism and understanding Jainism, then Sanskrit, Prakrit, and Hindi, both three languages. And if I take fourth, then Gujarati. So these four languages are very important. Then fifth be Kannada.
And how important do you think it is that the people that are studying Jainism are taught these languages alongside learning Jain Dharma?
Yeah, for them, I say, if they don't know, that would be okay. If they try to learn, that would be good. But those who want to really be a scholar or researcher or academician, then for them, these languages mean a lot.
Critical. Thank you. And Bindi, a question for you. Given that, in what you said, one thing that came about was that there were two streams that seemed to run through this. One was that, the lay community were trying to build structures to pass Dharma on, which traditionally has been the role of the monastic community, but of course, many don't travel, and therefore that would not be possible. And that this was, probably less systematic and more ad hoc, where needed, with several groups trying to do this. The two themes that I've noticed. One is that when you think about Jainism, there is, I think, an identity issue in Jainism. Stemming back to the census and the question about are you Jain, all the way back to when Jainism was actually recognized independently in India, which is less than 200 years ago. How much do you think that is due to the fact that we don't have a systemic method, like many faiths do, of transmitting our religion?
You mean in terms of having a strong identity?
Yes.
Yeah. I think it has a lot to do with that, because the informal socialization that children receive within the family gets diluted very quickly once they start going to school and meeting children of other faiths. In the US, in the UK context, we still get taught other religions. In the US, that's not so much the case. But unless there are these structures, and unless there is a systematic way of bringing particularly youth in the teenage years into the fold of the community, that identity will get lost. And I think that's what many of these youth groups, and when I look briefly at the Srimad Rajchandra Dharampur festival last year, they had a social innovation hackathon there. They had games and sports and so on. So it wasn't just about Jain Dharma. It was about bringing Jain youth together to engage in other kinds of activities, develop friendships. And that's the same with YJA. YJA is also about bringing Jain youth who live across the United States, sometimes in small towns, where there are very few other Jain families, together, not only to learn about Jain Dharma, but to socialize and get to know each other. So I think not having those structures, those clear structures, and in the UK, what we have had are caste-based structures, Oshwal and Namnab mainly, But even those are now losing its resonance amongst the youth. So I think one of the things that lay leaders need to think about is what is distinctive, and how do we pass on a particular culture, and what culture do we want to pass on, and what can bring youth together? Is it going to be these values around the Jain tradition? And the other thing is that I think that YJA has done is to link it to issues in the wider society. And I think that's actually an important innovation, because youth are growing up in the diaspora, in Western societies, where they're being exposed to other issues. So if we can link Jain Dharma to that. I was at a sociology conference just last week, and I really had to sit up because the panel was on AI, artificial intelligence, okay? And one of the speakers, who is not a Jain, he's an academic, brought up the Jain principle of anekantvat, linked it to AI, and I just sat up. I thought, I've never thought about this. But this is the kind of thing that I think we have to do in order to make it relevant for the youth of the 21st century. I appreciate Samiji's where you're coming from in terms of learning Sanskrit, Prakrit, and to understand the nuances of the Dharma. But to make it relevant for the vast majority of lay people who don't spend that kind of time in the languages, I think we need to link it to contemporary issues, and how these Jain philosophy and principles can link and help us think about these contemporary issues. So
let me follow that up with a question that we've got from Samyak Jain. So he says that he's born and brought up in the UK, and he looks at the values of Jain lifestyle and looks at the liberal context of the community in terms of alcohol or relationships, things like that, things that are normal in Western culture. And so how do you navigate these issues and still have a comfortable sense of belonging?
Is that to me?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, Samyak. I got your email. I'll reply. He's in Southamptom, so. So I think those are two different. For me, those are two different issues. In the sense that understanding Jain Dharma and understanding why we should refrain from alcohol, from meat, and so on, and explaining and having and once you have that understanding and that confidence to then navigate that with your peer groups, with your friendship groups, and so on. In the US, when I did my interviews in the US and in the UK back in 2008 to 2010, I asked all of my participants, how do you explain Jain Dharma to your friends, non-Jain friends, and they would focus on the principle of non-violence. And they said that people got that. So it's about having an understanding and having the confidence to explain to your peers why you refrain from alcohol, why you don't eat meat, and so on. And I think perhaps it was difficult some years ago, and perhaps it's difficult in smaller places outside of cosmopolitan cities such as London. But I think more and more there is an awareness, particularly through global media and so on. So I think that if you explain with confidence, you can navigate those relationships. But then at the end of the day, it's a personal choice. It's a personal choice as well.
Thank you.
And that is the flexibility of practicing Jain Dharma. I think that people, some people eat eggs, but they're vegetarian, so it's not clear cut at all.
So just following on from that, Samiji is somebody who teaches at Florida, at SOAS, and so on. How important do you think it is to look at the practical aspects of Jainism, whether that's environment, sustainability, animal rights, as much as, the Dharma and doctrine? And do you think those practical aspects are, in today's world, in today's context, more important?
Yes. These are the question the whole world is facing. And might be Hindu, they are digging their sastras and they are answering on their perspective. Similarly, Jains also doing so. And if there is a crisis of the climate change or sustainability, how one can find their way, then okay, Jains have their lifestyle through their centuries practices, and which is also one point to address these problems. And also, if we see that throughout the worldwide Jain, if they say, yes, this is the community which is not taking part in meat industry or other industries which are harming so much to the climate, so that is also a hope, a light of hope, I think.
Thank you. So our final question, again for you, Bindi, is this, that one thing that I wonder about in the research that you've done is, have you looked at how effective that transmission of Dharma has been? Because the one factor that I see sometimes is that the people who are teaching it are trying to overcome a number of hurdles. One is perhaps not understanding the way things are taught, in schools today. You mentioned AI, project-based learning, all these sorts of things that are now commonplace. And secondly, their need to understand this, Dharma to a point where they can teach it effectively. And do you think that transmission method or the methods you've described have been effective?
So Shivani Malhotra talks about the methods of teaching, and I've observed the methods of transmission at the conventions, the YJA convention and the YJ UK conventions. And I think that the lay people involved in transmission understand that we need to develop new teaching methods. We need to, we can't have that kind of rote memorization, and that's not going to appeal to children who are growing up with a Western education. We're going to need to engage them, make it much more interactive. And so I remember going to one of the YJ UK conventions and moving around to one of Michael Jackson's songs, for instance, just to get people up and about and moving. The other thing I remember is, these kind of personal development coaches. Who is it? Somebody, Covey, I can't remember the name now, using techniques for personal development and applying them to learning Jain Dharma. So I think there are shifts already happening in terms of how we engage the generations that are growing up here, and we have to, in order. So for me, I'm a practicing Jain, but I'm not a scholar, Jain scholar. I'm not a purist in that sense. For me, it is about transmitting the key principles and values to the upcoming generations, and we need to find ways to engage them. They are growing up here. We can't get away from that, and that is the reality. And while it may not be pure and traditional, we have to also adapt with times.
Thank you so much for that. And with that, can I thank both our presenters for their absolutely amazing insights. It's been a fascinating 1.5 hours. It's gone so quickly, and it's been amazing. And to give you some closing remarks, can I hand back to Christopher? Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Mehool. Thank you, Samani, and thank you, Bindi, for giving us your time and expertise. I wanted to also point us all to the Future of Jain Studies event that we will be having on May 13th. So that's about a month from now. You can register on our Dialogues website, and we look forward to seeing you there. Once again, from my collaborators at Ghent University and University of Birmingham, And on behalf of all of our presenters and our wonderful presider, Mehool, today, I want to thank you from Arihanta Institute as well for joining us, and we'll see you in about a month at the next event. Jai Jinendra.